Matt, really, you will know as well as I do that, of course, Michael Gove played a pivotal role in the handling of the COVID pandemic. He chaired what was called the sort of cabinet, was it the COVID O meetings, operations meetings. I was told by numerous cabinet ministers off air at the time, 2020, 2021, that he was chairing all the meetings. Well, not just when Boris Johnson was ill in hospital, but actually when Boris Johnson was just, frankly, too lazy to get into the detail, directing policy, not just in health, but in schools, whether you could go to the shop or not, and all these different policies, tier restrictions and the like. Absolutely crucial. I think, frankly, he's got off scot-free. But what do you make of an apology? As we keep saying, the COVID inquiry is obsessed with feelings over facts. But an apology, we hear this all the time, an apology to those who lost loved ones to COVID. When are we going to get the apology to all the people who lost loved ones, not from COVID during that time, because most people who died during those years didn't die from COVID, to the people but weren't able to be with them, for instance, the people who weren't able to meet their grandchildren when they were born, who were separated from their families, people who suffered from domestic abuse, having been locked in their homes, people who lost their jobs, lost their businesses, children who've been denied schooling, parents dealing with children who've now got mental health problems. This sky-high rate of anorexia and other eating disorders we're seeing from all the people damaged from this. When are we going to see the apology to those people?
Well, I think it's a very good point. There is the elephant in the room, is the rest of the excess deaths that have happened in the country over the last few years. The delays in diagnosing cancers, the heart disease events that went untreated, the misery, the loneliness, the mental health problems that resulted from lockdowns. And I had this when I was on the Science Committee in the Lords, and we were talking about this, and people would say, oh, yes, the mental health issues caused by COVID. And I would say, no, caused by lockdowns. Come on, let's be clear here. The lockdowns were the cause of those problems. And all the evidence, particularly the evidence from Sweden, suggests that many of those miserable experiences were avoidable with some much more voluntary, much more focused form of protection that would have resulted in no more COVID deaths, but many fewer deaths of another kind. And that's what we need this inquiry to look at, and it won't do so.
It point blank won't do so. We see again and again, tittle tattle, who said what in which WhatsApp group. We know on Thursday when Matt Hancock gives evidence, and then we've got Rishi Sunak next week, and also the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We just know it's all going to be about, well, did you say this about this person and what this WhatsApp said? It's totally irrelevant. So many of the questions are just completely irrelevant to the remit of the committee. Short periods of questioning, a few hours, where they don't actually ask about how you made this decision. I thought what was very interesting was Dr. Jenny Harries, who was a very senior figure in this sort of COVID decision-making group organisations, and is now basically the head of our health security agency, will actually help determine policy in the event of another pandemic. She actually, there's been Zoom calls and records of these conversations she had with Boris Johnson, where she was saying, no, there's no proof that masks work, no point in closing schools, no point in, not having the Cheltenham Festival and having groups, because it's not going to make any difference. Now, this is the reality. We knew all of that then, and then suddenly, on a sixpence, policy changed, and we decided not to follow our pre-pandemic planning. There doesn't seem to be any discussion about that decision-making process.
Well, there's another thing there's no discussion about, and we had a very interesting example of that this morning. Michael Gove said there is a significant number of people who think that this virus came from a laboratory. It was man-made. Now, he's the first government minister to say that out loud. And do you know what the inquiry's lawyer said? He said, oh, that's not an issue we're going to look into. It's a divisive issue that we...
It's a divisive issue? Well, no, they're worried we're all going to suddenly be racist against Chinese people. That's what he thinks.
I think that's where it's coming from. But it's enormously relevant to the inquiry because, first of all, it's where the real apology should be coming from. Not just the origination of the virus, but the way in which it was handled in the first weeks.
Oh, reparations as well, by the way.
So there's enormous issues there. But also, what Mr. Gove was saying, and he's quite right, is that if it's man-made, then the sequence of steps that we know were happening in that laboratory, where they were basically souping up viruses and training them on human lungs rather than bat guts, that sequence of events would have resulted in a highly infectious virus from the start, which is very unusual in a pandemic. Normally in a pandemic, the first virus is not very good at being infectious. And so we were completely taken by surprise by how extraordinarily infectious that virus was, way more than flus and other viruses. And that, of course, meant that all the plans we had didn't work. And it's why no country basically found a good way to keep the virus out or to cope with it. If you didn't get the first wave, you got the second wave. Like some Eastern European countries or
they did really
Eastern
well early
Asian
on,
countries.
and then absolutely. But this is the thing that you've written a
so
whole.
the origin is really relevant to the issues the inquiry
exactly.
wants
You
to talk
co-authored
about.
a whole book about this because of the importance of it, and you uncovered, as we've also seen with Elon Musk and these files and lots of freedom of information requests. We've discovered that that we've actually got very, very senior people on both sides of the Atlantic who were discussing this, and behind the scenes we're going, probably is from a lab, because hey, we were in America, they were helping to fund some of this research, they were involved in this research, and then saying, oh no, it couldn't possibly be that. And if Donald Trump says it could be from a lab, then obviously it's just racist and silly. But as soon as Joe Biden says it, then it's something we're allowed to discuss on the internet without having our Twitter handle taken down. It is extraordinary. The urge to cover this up, I find quite bizarre, because if countries are like China are actually developing viruses like this and don't have proper security, and we're going to have another one of these pandemics, which is very likely, we should probably know about it.
Well, there's two reasons why it's more likely we're going to see another pandemic now than it was in 2019, 2020. First of all, because the Chinese have refused to become more transparent as a result of this pandemic. After SARS, they were quite apologetic and said, look, we should have been more helpful and transparent. There's an absolute brick wall at the moment. So they're not going to give us warning. And we're seeing Chinese hospitals overwhelmed with probably what's normal flu at the moment, but we can't trust them. We can't be sure. And the second reason is because the strong possibility that this originated in a lab has left rogue regimes and bad actors all over the world thinking, hang on a minute, we could bring the world economy to its knees with a virus. Why don't we hire some virologists and start doing some of this work itself? But when I raised this with the Royal Society, the Academy of Medical Sciences, government ministers, I was always told, oh, no, we'll leave this to the WHO. Well, they're completely ad hoc to China, so that's futile.
I know, but this is the scary thing. Exactly, it's the real questions, the real debates.
Whose remit is it in this country?
And the whole point of this COVID inquiry really should be about preventing us from making any of the, learning the right things and learning what not to do as well. And it doesn't appear we're going to do any of that. Lord Ridley, you've been an absolute shining example of someone trying to get to the actual facts on this, author and former Conservative peer, Lord Ridley there.